think that leadership, number one, has never been easy, but I think also leadership now is harder than ever. And in large part because the volume and acceleration of change that's coming at you is at unprecedented levels. And by the way, it's not slowing down, right? And so the question really becomes, if you're a leader, you have to lead yourself first, and then you can lead others. So the way I describe it in this book that I'm writing is that there's an inner game and an outer game. And that whether you like it or not, leadership requires you to have a strong inner game, because the potential of the group that you lead is really defined by your own capacity. So that's not something that people ever talk about, you know? We all grew up in, especially the three of us grew up in a world that was really based on sort of a command and control leadership style. World moves too fast for that. You've got to create more trust than that, so people can move more fluidly. And that requires a different set of leadership skills, you know?
Welcome to the Cash Flow Chronicles Open Forum. I'm Matt Allison, a commercial insurance advisor helping businesses protect their cash flow by managing risk and putting the right protections in place.
And I'm Brad Metzger, a commercial lender specializing in finance solutions. From lines of credit and term loans to real estate mortgages, I'm here to help businesses grow and stay flexible.
This podcast is a community-driven conversation for CFOs, finance leaders, and business owners who want real insight into cash flow, credit, and financial resilience.
We keep it practical, collaborative, and to the point.
Powerful finance conversations in under 40 minutes, built for busy professionals. This is the Cash Flow Chronicles Open Forum.
Hey, Matt, thanks so much for joining us here on the Cash Flow Chronicles Open Forum, man. I appreciate you for taking the time to talk more about yourself and what you're working on.
Great to be here. Thanks, Matt.
So what you bring to the table, you have a number of years of experience in leadership in the banking community, and it's really kind of built up a background given where you're spending your time now. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about your history? And
as you've said, I have lots of years of experience, which is code for I'm old, right?
I see my gray hair. So.
Yeah. Now, I've been, I just stepped out of a 35-year career in commercial banking and capital markets, and it was a great experience. My last, 20 years on and off were at Bank of America or antecedents to Bank of America. And I had the privilege of being the president of Bank of America Michigan here for about 12 years, and in Detroit. I also led commercial banking around the Midwest in various formats and sustainability across the country there for the commercial bank in the last few years. So it's a broad base of experience, both running, a big organization or big businesses inside a big company, but also working with literally hundreds, if not thousands, of business leaders, helping them grow their business.
I think that's a great delineation, because when we first met, we were talking about corporate America. It's got to be terrible. Like, I can't imagine running corporate entity because you have so many deliverables.
Responsibility.
It's hard.
People accounting for it to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you had mentioned, you kind of challenged that assumption right away by talking about the power of and versus or, which is a big focus of your overall practice right now, correct?
Yeah. I mean, the number one thing that I'm working on is trying to help leaders of all kinds operate in a world that's accelerating faster than ever, because I believe that it's not strategy that's the key element of success these days. It's really the capacity, leadership capacity to execute on that strategy. Because there are so many things you have to deal with, for example, in corporate America or other places, for example. The question now is, when we're all as overloaded as we are, how do we create capacity to focus on what matters most and create the energy to lead our teams through all that?
Yeah, I think it's so important, because even speaking in my professional experience, you have like that middle market manager. So they're never available because, hey, I'm so sorry, I'm getting another phone call. I'll call you back. And they never call you back just because they're always on the phone. Even think about our lives.
Prioritization is probably the number one thing.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
It's 7:00. You're reading emails. You're trying to figure out what your day's going to look like. About 99% of the time, it never turns out that way.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You have to figure out what is important to you. And a lot of times I'm finding out it's important to empower your team to help get to the point of letting them drive their day and inform the owner, the leadership.
Yep, that's true.
So one of the questions I want to bounce off of you was, in your experience, in your experience with culture, how important is that with an organization?
Well, the old strategy or the old saying is culture eats strategy for lunch. And it's actually true because culture is what we believe and how we treat each other. And if we all believe a similar set of and align around a similar set of values and we treat each other consistently and respectfully, we don't need to worry about that control step. I don't need to it's much easier for me to empower my team, for example, and to trust that their work's going to be done, my work's going to be done, and we can all move in the same direction, right? And so I think that culture piece is critical. But what happens when we're overloaded is that we try to oversimplify the world. We skip steps, and when we do that, that's when the culture starts to break down because people start to look at life through a set of false choices, usually either or choices. I can do speed or quality. I can do people, I can deliver for the people, or I can deliver the numbers. But in reality, if we want to be successful, we got to figure out a way to do both. And that actually starts with getting clear on priority and then aligning people around that shared vision by creating trust. And then executing your way through it together, usually through a set of small experiments rather than trying to figure out, hey, I've got the answer. Every time that I worked especially in large corporate land, when we had the big bang answer, we were going to do the big technology transformation, right? Or we were going to make the big pivot and we hadn't done the work to bring our teams along through that decision. That never went well. I'm sure that will resonate with your audience.
The good old change management structure.
You got it.
How do we handle change?
Yeah, I did a bunch of that, and there was always an art to it.
Yeah. How does communication come into the overall process, in your opinion? Because you had mentioned you have kind of a working process that you go through.
Sure.
A rolling communication structure. It's like, hey, expectations are set.
Yeah. I mean, communication is the key to leadership, but it's also the key to being effective in business. I do a lot of work now with Michigan State, and we talk about the things that our graduates need to be successful when they come out into the workplace. And what's interesting, the feedback that we've gotten from this group of business leaders that I co-lead, called the Green and White Council, is that the technical skill and the training is just assumed that it's going to be there. Right. So the differentiator now and the key thing that students need to be able to demonstrate is their ability to communicate, is their ability to have a conversation in person, write an email that makes sense, that's not in like code, right? And work in a multi-generational environment. So, communication is key. And I think the best leaders are the ones that can communicate, to a broad group of people, but it really starts with them themselves being able to lead and manage themselves.
I think it's one of the challenges that I've had in my career. It's like, hey, as long as you communicate with clients, we talk about leading a team. Hey, these are the current things we're working through. Please contact me. I'm here to be honest with you. I'm not going to set unrealistic expectations for you.
Yeah.
I think that's something we can all speak to in certain situations. And usually speaking, if you're talking to a client, they're like, hey, this is a very real example. And vice versa. Some younger individuals in their career promise the world just to get in the door. So walk me through your personal experience when running an organization. What pressure did people not see because you're in that pillar position that necessarily people always got everything dialed in?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is part of like the way that we want to put leaders on pedestals. We want to assume that they've got answers. And I think the most effective times in my career were the ones when I was honest about the times when I didn't, but was clear about how I was going to get that answer, either with my own team or with the people that I was working for. And that in order to do that, you really have to create a sense of psychological safety for your own team if you're leading people, and ideally if that's the environment that you're working in. Because a lot of times the challenges that you're dealing with are those ones that they're all about uncertainty, or they're all about a set of trade-offs that sometimes you feel like you have to make, but in actuality, sometimes you don't need to if you're willing to sort of hold that tension long enough and figure out a way to work your way through it, right? So very often in banking, for example, if you're driving loan growth, there is always the trade-off between loan growth and credit quality. But actually, we need both. Right? You have to make good loans, but you have to make as many of them as you can, obviously, to grow your business. And so that's a different conversation than getting caught up in the trap of one or the other. Because the easy way out is to say, well, I can't grow because this is my credit box. But the challenge is always to stay in that tension of how do we get there? and do the work to get to the place where you can do both.
In your experience thus far, do you think that's a challenge for many leaders to be honest and authentic, to say, hey, I'm challenged with this,
I think
versus they look at me as a leader to drive decisions?
Yeah. I think that leadership, number one, has never been easy, but I think also leadership now is harder than ever. And in large part because the volume and acceleration of change that's coming at you is at unprecedented levels. And by the way, it's not slowing down, right? And so the question really becomes, if you're a leader, you have to lead yourself first, and then you can lead others. So the way I describe it in this book that I'm writing is that there's an inner game and an outer game. And that whether you like it or not, leadership requires you to have a strong inner game, because the potential of the group that you lead is really defined by your own capacity. So that's not something that people ever talk about. We all grew up in, especially the three of us grew up in a world that was really based on sort of a command and control leadership style. World moves too fast for that. You've got to create more trust than that, so people can move more fluidly. And that requires a different set of leadership skills, and I think those are the ones that we need to teach people. And it's not about your character in the sense that, do you have the ability to be honest? It's like, do you have the capacity to communicate openly because you've managed yourself well enough to hold that tension?
I think that's a really important point. I know when we talked previously, one of my first career choices I had was there's like a delineation of priorities that were driven down by corporate, and this particular manager, he's like, well, I don't know, it's your business, do what's right.
Yeah.
And I was in northern half of North Dakota completely alone. And I'm like, wow, I can do that. And he like empowered me because he knew I had enough initiative.
Yeah.
I can deliver on things. And that's something I carry on moving forward.
No, that's funny, because a lot of times you hit it right on the head. I always have to ask for permission. It's so much, especially in banking, it's like, I want to do this.
Yeah.
What does credit policy say I can and can't do?
Yeah.
And it's always asking for permission. As soon as you get that new leader that says, what do you think? And it's like, it doesn't matter what I think, but it really does. And that's where you kind of go back, where you have to understand yourself first. But yeah.
But it also, if you're the new leader who's walking into that sort of an environment, you've got to really understand the context in which you're walking in. I've seen this before in my career. Well, I mean, if you're walking into an environment that has been in that command and control space, stay in your lane. And all of a sudden you're saying, hey, listen, we're going to expand that a little bit. You need to stay in your lane, but I'm interested in what this lane has to say about this lane, right? And that's a conversation that's worth having. And then you empower someone to make a decision without oversight. But that's a new thing for them. Very often what will happen is that the person who's being empowered will say, well, what's my box? They still want to know what the parameters are, because that's not comfortable. You have to really understand that this takes reps. This takes, this is why I describe the power of and, which is what I talk about, as a practice, because it takes practice. If you're going to move away from that environment that I grew up in, and you're probably still in, Brad, where there is a box, and that's there to keep us all kind of safe. But on the other hand, that box can also be limiting when it comes to innovation, growth, and change.
Think about it from a position, let's say one of Brad's peers, where it's like, hey, this is your parameter, stick within this parameter. And it's like, oh, wait, I'm free to do as I see fit.
Yeah.
That whole culture shift, like you talked about, it's going to take time.
Yeah.
And that can speak to that in my professional career as well. It's like, do things this way. And of course, I always challenge that perception, because I got to deliver a number. So that's not working.
This is where we used to talk a lot about the concept of escalation. And, there was always this constant push-pull about the fact that, on the one hand, certain leaders would say, hey, escalation's healthy because this is on the margin where we sort of adjudicate the and. That makes sense. But a lot of other people didn't want to escalate because they took it personally. If I had a different point of view on a deal, for example, and I was going to escalate, that means that by definition, someone else's point of view is wrong, or at least different. And so then this goes back to this idea of trust and safety that leaders have to create, to understand that what we're trying to do here is not necessarily make you happy or you happy. We're trying to serve this bigger goal. And if we deliver on this bigger goal, then collectively we all win.
So it's bigger than just the individual relationship. We're all aiming towards a larger overall.
That's exactly it. And this isn't compromise. If we do that work and we have that conversation consistently and well, we get to a place that's different, ideally better than the one that we would have had if we just did a straight up, I win a little bit, you win a little bit. Let's move forward.
We talk about people being in the box and trying to change that culture. How do you go from the blame and pressures to a open mindset for an organization? You're going to have to, it's test, trial, and error, but not everybody in the organization is moving at the same pace.
Yeah. Let me maybe walk you through a couple of things to answer that question, because there's a lot in it, I think, Brad. The first is this idea of how is it that we get into this trap of either or thinking to begin with. And it's really become endemic in our culture. And it's very simple. So the chain is this: we live in a world of accelerating change that creates pressure. That pressure automatically forces us to try to keep up with that rate of change. And so we simplify things. This is where we get into the either or thinking. Actually, research has shown it's a natural biological response to pressure and change. It's nothing special about it. And it actually works fine, especially when you're in a crisis or when a situation is very well defined. Like, hey, if it's in the user manual for your car, you know how to fix it, right? But increasingly in a world that we live in that's AI powered, that's changing every day, there's no user manual for what we're going through. We have to figure this out together. So that what I've done is, number one, first judo move is to understand that we're probably thinking in either or terms. Let's try to find the yes and. Let's get to the power of and. That's one. Just that realization itself that, hey, there may be a different way, causes us to do the 3 moves that I talk about, which the first one of which is pause and reflect. Like, take a beat, even if it's literally a beat, so that you can get clear on what really matters most and who matters most and what really we can control. And then the hard work of what I call finding the and begins, this is how you get out of the box thinking, right? And so the way that you do that is you really try to identify what's the field of possibility here that would serve multiple priorities. So we talked a little bit earlier in banking about credit quality and loan growth. That's a sticky wicket, but the way that you get there to get out of a box is to do a lot of listening. And that has two benefits. One is people feel heard, so they feel more engaged in the solution. Number 2, you're going to uncover better ideas. But there's an art to the way you listen. Like, if you just show up and say, hey, I'm the guy from 2 levels up, I want to hear what you have to say in 15 minutes, you're going to get the talking points. This is where creating some intimacy and in a spot that's more neutral, where you're not showing up with your battle armor on, and understanding who that person is at the personal level a little bit, starts to get better answers out of folks. So they feel seen and heard. Once you do that, you're able to define for the group, hey, I've got this view. We're going to do, in this case, loan growth and credit quality. Let's go work on this together. And the key is to not sort of declare victory. I have the answer. The answer is that what you really do is say, we're going to run some little experiments to see how this works. And I want you to work on it. I want you to work on it. And you go do it and you tell us what you learned. So now people feel like they're part of the solution. If you create that as a practice, that's the way to keep your team together in the constant white water that we're all living in these days.
So it goes from me to we. I look at, it always comes back for me thinking like a manufacturing plant.
Yeah.
So if you have an owner that is sitting in the office, always in paperwork, but never walking the floor, I laugh because every single time I go to one of my manufacturing customers, I'm walking with the owner and they know everybody by name.
Yeah.
And they know them personally. You can tell because that culture that they've created, I already know that that business is successful. And sure enough, it is.
Almost always that's the case. And one other thing I noticed, Brad, about those sorts of situations is that those are the companies that pivot best. Especially in automotive, right? We've worked in automotive our whole careers. You're going to have to pivot, and you may have to pivot, in the middle of a week. My son works in automotive. He's learning this lesson. And so having those relationships, building that trust, that short circuits a lot of hierarchy, and especially when you work in an environment where the person on the line, let's say, who has spotted the problem first, is comfortable enough to take that to leadership, even if it's not directly in their chain, to say, hey, we've got either a problem or, hey, there's an opportunity here. This is where the fun stuff is, right? If we did this, we could kill it. Let's go do this, right?
Changing machines, moving tools, or whatever.
All of it.
Directly related to their role.
Or the salesperson comes in from the field and says, I just came across this awesome opportunity. Yeah, let's figure this out. Let's call a timeout. Let's pause and let's try to find an and here. How can we do what we're doing today and find an opportunity? In fact, I've got a client of mine, a friend of mine who leads a small manufacturing business who found that opportunity in the middle of the tariff crisis last year. Their tariff bill went from a couple $100,000 to $1.2 million per month. But in the middle of all that, they figured out they were also getting inbounds. They do a lot of import work. They were getting inbounds from other importers saying, hey, could you help us land goods in the US? Because now we need to kind of go directly. And so they basically created a little 3PL business inside of their manufacturing business. And that's now the cash flow driver of the company. Would have never come up unless that organization had enough flexibility and enough, trust, where the salesperson who was getting that inbound felt empowered to bring it to the CEO.
And I think with the cultural shifts, remember the good old pyramid organizational charts, and now it's like we're a horizontal organization. I'm sure you've heard that many times.
Live that.
How often do you hear it versus see it?
Hear it a lot more than you see it.
Yeah.
And the thing of it is, folks, is that we all have to understand that this stuff's hard. Leadership is difficult. Managing is difficult. The world, the degree of difficulty on the dive is higher than it ever has been. We have to have some compassion for ourselves and for other people in that regard. It also means that the bar to being a good leader is higher. This is my job now, is to help those leaders, get to the bar that they need to get to for their organizations. But it's easier to say that we're in a horizontal or matrixed organization and then actually do it. And so it requires conscious thought about how much capacity am I creating for my team to make those relationships? What is the field of empowerment and accountability I'm actually going to give? What kind of time am I devoting to this? If you tell me what your priorities are, I will actually look at your budget and your calendar. How are we creating the space to make that
happen? So walk me through, as far as your history, obviously, what helped you develop this and/or decision framing and helped you develop this book?
It's a very winding road and it's very iterative. I had the privilege actually of being the chair of the Mackinac Policy Conference in 2023. And we chose the theme as the theme, the power of and. Actually, my wife and I chose it together. At B of A, we used to use a lot of Jim Collins thinking. And one of the things that stuck with me the most is the idea of that the best firms were the ones that embraced the genius of and rejected the tyranny of or. And I wanted to bring that and idea to the conference so that we could put things that a lot of people feel are in conflict together and have conversations around them. So things like sustainability and profitability, these kind of big meta issues. I was shocked at how resonant that theme was with people. And so when I left the bank, I really started thinking more about, well, how do I create a scenario or a framework for leaders to use that concept more, practically than is laid out, say, in the Collins books, which is touched on, but not really drilled into. I also had my own burnout experience that was, as I interrogated it and thought about it after I had left the bank, was really based in my own binary thinking, up or out, success or failure. And I realized that the power of and guy was the guy who was in or thinking. And that's one of the things that landed me in a space where I felt like I needed to call a timeout. So in the year since, I've spent a lot of time talking to leaders, working with leaders, studying, reading, writing. And, I've developed this idea of the power of and what we call the and intelligence framework as a tool for leaders and their teams to be able to manage themselves and others in this world that we live in that's accelerating. And so that's how I got there, right? And I've worked with some partners to turn this into a workshop. They're organizational psychologists by trade. And so a lot of this work is rooted in neuroscience. It's rooted in research. But what I really want is for people to be able to use this very practically, not just in the workplace, but also in the way they manage themselves or the way that they might say lead their family, because we're all leaders, in some way, shape, or form. So that's the how I got there part. The what it is this idea of, hey, we're in an accelerating world. We're going to default to either or thinking more often than not in that space, especially in a media environment, for example, that is all binary. Everything is good or bad, right or wrong. So the question now is, how do we create capacity for leaders to lead in that environment? And so that's what the book is about. The book is a little bit about my journey, sort of how I came to it. It's very authentic. I'm very open book, if you will, about the experience, but I use it more as a case study. Like, hey, it's, this is something that happens to a lot of people. And as I found out it does, how do we now react to it? And that's what the book is about. So it's the 3 moves of and intelligence, and then how you apply that to leadership. And then more importantly, maybe the benefits of what you get for leading that way. You that allows you to lead sustainably and not have the world beat you down, and actually win and thrive through it. And then also leave a legacy. And that's ultimately what we're about. I went to a funeral on Saturday for a guy who I'd worked with at the chamber for over a decade. And he was a wonderful guy. He was a lawyer, among other things. The church was absolutely packed, standing room only inside the church. I stood, and nobody mentioned a whit about how many hours he built. All that they talked about was what of an impact they made on them as people. And that's ultimately what this is about.
I think that's a great point. As a leader, you got to manage with the head and the heart, to reference another book.
You do.
How do you empower the individuals but still deliver on the overall profitability metrics? One of the goals I have is to always make an impact in everyone I interact with. Always answer the phone, be a helping hand. Obviously, I get yelled at by my significant other at times, but it's important to be there for everybody whenever you can be. I appreciate that immensely. So you mentioned, as far as even being a leader at home, not just in the workplace, is that applicable within the power of and or?
It is, and I talk about it in the book. I basically say, if someone is looking to you as your example, or if you are someone who impacts the experience of someone else, you're a leader. By definition, if you're a parent, you're a leader. But you may also be that person inside of the work group that you have who is the answer, the person who everyone goes to for answers. Like my old executive assistant was a massive leader inside the organization, because people would come to Anne-Marie for all kinds of things. She was very influential. And so it was important for her to be able to lead. And, we led together in a lot of ways. And my wife and I, for example, lead together in a lot of ways. And I think all great partnerships, and we've seen this spread throughout our careers, a lot of great companies are led by a 2-person team, the power of pairs, right? That's not uncommon. And that's one of the examples of how you can amplify your leadership through that power of pair.
It's like when they were talking about, when you're trying to pick a good leader, knowing what's at home, how is that relationship? A lot of times they were like, why don't we bring spouses in? Or why don't we get the families together? And you can kind of see that dynamic, because what you see in the office may mimic what you see at home, and vice versa.
Yeah, if COVID's taught us nothing, right? The membrane between work and home life is very permeable, right? And that those two interact very, very strongly. And you can't unscramble that egg.
Yeah, I think just in our world, how many hours can we put into the workplace in a week? And your significant other understands that, and there to support appropriately. I used
to be asked all the time, Matt, how much time do you put into the market president job, which at B of A, like some other places, is not your full-time job, but it's a big responsibility. And I would say, I have no idea how to answer that question. It's all one big omelet.
It's always on, but
yeah. I mean, it's taken together. It's a lot of work, especially if you're going to do it well. You have to bring your whole self to that work. But there are also dividends that come back to you when you lead that way.
I think that's 100% relevant.
So I got a question for you. How you wrote a book? What did you learn? Was it easy? Was it hard? Where are we at?
Yeah, I'm still writing the book. It'll be out hopefully at the end of, if it's not out by the end of Q2, my wife is going to have a big problem with me. So it's going to be out by the end of Q2. I think I'm on version 7 of the outline, because if you want to clean your house, throw a party. If you really want to clean up your thinking, write a book. And so what I've done is I've iterated on it. I've learned about it. I've gotten sharper. I've gotten better. I think the team that's helping me with this is kind of going nuts because of it. But I feel like I'm close to being able to snap a chalk line and say, number one, this passes the useful test. This is useful to people I'm trying to serve. Number two, it's practical. That was the other thing. And number three, it's something I can be proud of and put my head on the pillow and say, okay, this is a set of statements I'm willing to put out there in the world, and for good or for bad, and talk about it. So that I've passed through, or I'm skiing through those three gates. And so now we're in the process of shaping and getting the story right so that it's readable and accessible to the reader.
That's triggers my next question. So as far as Blue Lake's ideas, your overall advisory practice, and that is a reflection of you, correct?
Mm-hmm. It is.
So talking to other individuals, they want to have the perfect LinkedIn post. They want to have the perfect email.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit as far as building your own business from your leadership experience?
Yeah, it's been it's an ongoing practice of building that, and I've always admired the entrepreneurial clients that I've worked with my whole career. 35 years of this, and so as I parachuted out of that experience, I thought I've got a window to sort of experiment with this rather than jumping right back into the next big organization, and so that's what I'm in the process of doing. And the book is a big part of it, but ultimately what my job is, and the team that is sort of coalescing around Blue Lake ideas, what we're about is to help leaders and their teams lead themselves and others through this world of accelerating change, either through the book, maybe a keynote speeches that I do more and more now, and also working directly with companies as either a board member or an advisor. And those are the sort of the three lanes of work that we're doing. And, it starts with this idea of talking to a leader and saying, your biggest challenge is capacity. Right away, people feel heard about that because that is the biggest challenge. I don't meet anybody, especially someone with a CEO title, who's not some flavor of overloaded. And I get it. I've lived it.
What's the average tenure of a CEO right now?
The average tenure of a Fortune 500 CEO is 5 years and falling. And I was with I was with MSU's president the other day, and that's roughly the same in university president land, and it's falling. Now, I'm clear that MSU's president, who I think is a tremendous leader, his goal is to, last a lot longer than that, and I think he will. But it's a tremendously volatile, difficult environment, especially when you're the CEO of a big company.
I was talking to a friend of mine. He's just like, you do it for like 6 years, build a good savings bank, and then just enjoy relief after the fact.
I had lunch with a CEO friend of mine. He's a Fortune 500 CEO. He's here in town. He's just now stepping out of the role. But he told me, this is about a year and a half ago, he said, Matt, there are probably 20 minutes a day that I don't think about work.
Yeah.
And he thinks, and he does a little bit of work every day. I mean, that's just the world that you live in. I used to be fairly close to Bank of America's CEO. I wasn't like we were friends, but I would be with him a fair amount. And it's astonishing the amount of mental, physical, and emotional capacity it takes to lead consistently over a long period of time at that level. It's amazing.
Yeah, just the workload. I mean, even in our day-to-day operations, the stress we face, imagine being responsible for 200,000 individual employees.
Yeah. These are really, really amazing jobs.
Tell us a little bit more about the book, where people can buy it, how they can work with you.
Yeah, it'll be on Amazon. That'll be the primary place that it's sold. It will be out as an ebook, a soft cover, and an audiobook. So that will all happen again in Q2. The easiest place to find me is on the web or on LinkedIn. BlueLakeIdeas.com is the website. And just, hit me up on LinkedIn. It's Matt Elliott, and it's all right there. I'll be ramping up. I'm a regular poster of a lot of the content that shows up in the book already. I'm working on becoming a little more, I would say, intentional with that. And so it'll be out on LinkedIn. You'll see it on Substack, and you'll probably see it on YouTube.
Perfect. And the final piece, what tips and tricks do you recommend any executive leader right now?
Well, these three ideas of the and intelligence framework are things you can use literally today. The first one is pause. Create moments of pause in your day, in your week, in your hour, because those moments of pause will help you bring down the temperature and expand your thinking. That's one. The second one is try to find those ands, question your choices or question your alternatives and see if there's an and in there and not an or, and bring people into that conversation with you. And then the last one is, if you're going to need to continue to drive change and evolve, that's just sort of table stakes, but don't throw Hail Mary passes. As Jim Collins would say, shoot bullets before cannonballs. Try some lightweight things out before you commit, but then that'll increase your learning, which makes it easier for you to change. It does what I call create the dividend of courage to lean into evolution, not be afraid of it, because ultimately that's what we're all going to have to do.
Absolutely. Appreciate you for jumping on that. It was a very enjoyable conversation.
Loved it. Thanks, guys.
Again, you guys reach out to Matt. He has some great insights to bring to the table.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, you've made it all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Make sure you subscribe to the Cashflow Chronicles Open Forum newsletter, drop us a like, and follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube.